Welcome to Hoops and Headsets, a podcast completely focused on women's basketball, brought to you by women's basketball commentators. Our first few episodes, we are focusing in on the EuroLeague Women's Final Six. Our last two episodes, we looked at London and Zaragoza. Now we are back, and our sights are firmly fixed on Girona. Again, I'm joined by Shona Thorburn to bring her insight, her wisdom to what the Final Six are going to look like for Girona. I wrote this question, the first question we're going to approach. And then I looked at it the other day and I was like, have I been too bold? And then I looked at it today and I went, I like that question again. So I don't know how you're going to react to this. So the first question I've got for you is, can Yotsita and Holm be considered one of the best backcourt duos of the season in EuroLeague Women's this year?
Yeah, so that's a bold question. I think we can consider them one of the best backcourt duos. Have they consistently done that all season long? This is where I kind of need to separate the question, because I do think, the times when both of them have had a great game, and they have done it, but they have not done it consistently, unfortunately, in my opinion. So when they do play well, one of the best backcourts in the game. But when one of them doesn't play well, or both of them at the same time, which has arrived this season as well for them, it's not the same team. So it's really interesting to think about that question, because I love watching them play. I like watching them play together. I just, there's been times, I don't know if they seem fatigued throughout the season and, have not produced like we expect them to day in and day out, I guess, game in and game out. And maybe it's us putting a little bit too much pressure, but they're just such talented players that you kind of expect them to always play great. And, that's not life. That's not realistic.
Like I said, I kind of went on a roller coaster with this question on my own, just going, I like that. No, I don't like that question. No, I agree with that question. I was arguing with myself. And I think it comes down to the fact I think I watched quite a bit of them because I was really interested. When I saw them sign in the off season, I was like, oh, wow, I love that. It's a bold move. It's a brave move, because none of them are proven at EuroLeague Women's level. So that is properly going all in on the chips to give your backcourt, hand it across to that level of inexperience. But, having seen Yotsita play national team, I'm like, don't even worry about it. Should be absolutely fine. And also, even more surprising, watching Holm, and from a personal perspective, at times dismantle Great Britain whilst playing for Sweden, I kind of knew that she would be absolutely fine as well. So when it was announced, I got super excited. So I watched, really dove into their games early on, and they were really impressive early on, And I remember the EuroLeague Women's graphic where they blank out the teams who lose their unbeaten records each week. And I think it ended up with, I might be wrong, but it was like maybe just Girona and Fenerbahce left. And I was like, that's a huge statement. But I think it is that inconsistency that puts a big shadow over this question of whether they can be considered. Like you say, on their day, they are supremely problematic to go up against, but it's not been consistent enough for them maybe to take that mantle just yet. And I think, going back to the original point I made, I think it's the inexperience that potentially is that consistency. They're not used to week after week after week going up against the best players on the planet. And that takes time to be able to play domestic at the weekend and then get yourselves ready for EuroLeague Women's on a Wednesday or a Tuesday, whatever it is. And to get into that rhythm of, I've got to show up every week. I cannot take a possession off. There's no option for that. Do you think it is that experience? Obviously, Yotsita's just 20 and hasn't played EuroLeague Women's. Holm has had a slower trajectory to the top level and to kind of claim her star. She's 26. Is it? If they re-sign again next year and go again next year, do we think we'll see more consistency, or is there something about that dynamic that just doesn't work?
No, I think that dynamic is great together because, like you said, Holm is more of a, pass first creator type of a point guard. And that can benefit Yotsita because, she's going to run systems. She's going to find her when she's open. She's going to get her the ball. And then Yotsita can take the shot because Holm, she doesn't care if she scores. And okay, a little bit different with Sweden because they need her to score. She can score. Girona. Like, she can score for Girona when they need it, but that's not her first intention as a point guard. So I do, you said it. I think Girona had a great start to the season, and those two players were a big part of that success. And I think inexperience definitely kicked in the second part of the season for Girona, not just, in EuroLeague, but also domestically, if you take a look at them as well. And, we've talked about it in other episodes. Seasons are long. There's not many teams who can consistently, continue to level their game or just plateau a little bit if they're already, one of the top teams. Most seasons are like this. There's up and downs. There's moments where you don't play well. And Girona, I think, are suffering that. But I think a lot of it has to do with, I mean, it's the first time that they're playing in a EuroLeague Final Six, other than Coach, because Coach has been there,
Done that
many times.
Yeah,
He's done that, so he knows what it takes, and that's, a big reason why I think Girona is going to the Final Six. But I do think, as a whole, this team is a little bit inexperienced, and we have seen that the second part of the season, and we've seen that in their backcourt as well. They haven't lived up to the consistency that I think that they are capable of doing with the talent that they have.
To a certain degree, could the conversation around the backcourt also not maybe be laid at their feet, but in the sense of other teams might have been taken by surprise early in the season, and then once they see the rhythm of how this combo work together, they're a little bit easier to solve as a puzzle. The first few weeks, the scouting reports are a little bit fluffier, I'm sure, a little bit more blurry as you're trying to work out what's going on. But as the season progresses, you can be far more fine-tuned and very detail-specific about how to break certain things up. Is that another potential here, that it's not necessarily those two players that have struggled with consistency, but teams have worked them out a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I don't think teams early in the season really knew what to expect from Girona, how they were going to play with the roster that they had. And, I think teams have adjusted as the season has gone on. And that's why, we saw them with more losses in the second part of the season than, well, they didn't have any to begin the season, but they did enough to get themselves where they are and a ticket to the Final Six because of how well they played in the beginning. And I think it's a really good point. I think teams figured out how to scout them the second half of the season, and that's why we saw Girona come up with a couple more losses. I also saw them play in the domestic league as well. And, it wasn't that confident team we saw at the beginning of the season, I would say.
Yeah, so they've lost they've only won one of their last 5 EuroLeague women's games. That level of form, we talked about it on the opposite for Zaragoza. They're running in full head of steam, feeling invincible right now. Does that undermine a player's confidence, mindset heading into this? Will they be worried heading into the Final Six because of the form they've shown in the closing stages in that second round, effectively?
I think it does affect them. I think mentally, they know that they haven't played their best basketball in the last couple months. The good thing is we've had a little bit of a pause for national team breaks. So, people either went to their national teams or maybe had a much needed physical and mental break. I do know Coach is tough and doesn't give them a lot of days off. And, that's the way he coaches. That signing there wherever he coaches. So, that heading into the season. But, it can take a toll if you're not really used to it. And we have seen, Girona, this is a newer team for them. It wasn't the same team that they've had in the past. So I think they clicked well early and they need to start clicking now. But it is difficult because they are going in with a little bit more of a losing streak than the other teams heading into the Final Six.
And I think the big issue for me looking at that is they can't, within the, building up a month before the Final Six, there's nothing they can do about the EuroLeague women's form because that's gone. So they can't get momentum in that. Those games are done. They're entering on this cold streak, as it were. Does that put put some more emphasis on their domestic form. Obviously, at the moment, they're sitting second in their domestic league behind Zaragoza. Lost to Zaragoza, I think, a few weeks ago in a really, like, one of them's on 3 wins and 3 losses and the other's on 4. So in a really critical game. But they've got a few games building up to that final 6. Is that a way they can start getting some momentum, or will they compartmentalize domestic basketball and kind of European competitions separately so the form won't translate for them?
You kind of made a good point. I mean, if they can sort of get on a little bit of a roll in the domestic league, and if I'm not mistaken, I think the women's cup, Spanish Cup, is coming up. The Copa de Reina, uh, before the final 6.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if Girona can go on a little bit of a run and, maybe upset Zaragoza, Valencia, and make it to the final, lift that trophy, they're going to feel good heading into the final 6. It's so easy for players to get down mentally during a season. And it's harder to dig yourself out of that than, you know, like, you have one bad game and it could affect you for weeks. Where you have one good game and you still haven't got out of it because you're still thinking about what happened in the past. And, I do know that obviously coach, he's incredibly experienced, and I would imagine that he knows what to tell his team, his players, to try and help with their confidence as the season moves on. But I do think domestically they need to go on a little bit of run heading into the final 6 so they are feeling better, because I think that could translate to how they play at the final 6.
Yeah, it's like you say, a lot seems to lean on coach, right, to try and mentally flip this around. I suppose that's why he keeps getting big jobs around Europe, is that he's able to do that process. Just looking through their roster quickly, they only have one player in their 30s. So they only have Kanea, 31 years of age. That's their oldest player. For me, I feel like I'd want some more vets in my team. I'd want a bit more battle-hardened
Right.
players in that team. Now, don't get me wrong, they've got players that have been there, done that, the likes of Quevedo and Erica Carter, and there's plenty in there. Chloe Bibby, for example. There's plenty of quality players with lots of experience, but just a couple of mid-30s, early to mid-30s, who don't necessarily want minutes, don't want the ball in their hand, but have that kind of elder statesperson appeal about them and are able to settle the ship a little bit. Is that something you've experienced in the teams you've kind of been working with, that you see that age dynamic and experience dynamic at work? And could that be an issue that Girona have this year, that they just don't have necessarily that kind of veteran players in their roster?
Yeah, I think, sometimes we disregard veterans if they don't produce the same way that they did a few years ago. But for me, you need a couple veterans, because they're the ones, coaches can only do so much. Yeah, they can prepare, they can, do the scouting, but they're not the ones on the court during the game. And a good veteran teammate, they know when to huddle. They know what to say in the locker room. They know what to say at halftime. They know what to say, at points of the game when it's not going well. And they have the experience to back it up. And, if the players, which hopefully they do, respect the veterans, they're going to listen to them and they're going to be able to calm them down. And I think it really does help the team. I do think, having Laia Palau on the staff, unfortunately, she's not with Girona anymore. I do think she was maybe the coach who could do that to the players, because,
Yeah.
watching her coach these last few years, she was definitely a player's coach. And you often saw her, same with when she was with the Spanish national team. I mean, she was the one talking during the games individually to players. And you saw that was the way she was also coaching with Girona. And, unfortunately, she's no longer with them. So maybe that's a little bit of a, reason that we've seen them
Yeah.
have a difficult time, after Christmas, in the EuroLeague, possibly.
Yeah, definitely would make sense. Losing someone of that caliber, that
Mm-hmm.
experience, that quality, been there, done that. And someone that deals with players so well, manages those relationships, and is that kind of bridge between a player and a coach, which sometimes is the kind of gap that the communication falls down between. That would, without doubt, kind of make sense.
Mm-hmm.
final question for you today. I've got another sneaky one that I might throw your way just in case. But Girona heading to Zaragoza, is there any form of advantage with that? Obviously, they face Raya in their quarterfinal. Raya will have a flight to deal with and all of that kind of stuff, being in another country, all of those kind of things. Not the case for Girona. Is that an advantage for them that it is, I had a quick look, a 4-hour drive, a 3-hour train ride? Does that help them and give them a little bit of a leg up?
Absolutely. I mean, anytime you don't need to take a flight, it's an advantage for a team. You talk about hydration. I mean, even if it's not a long flight from Venice to well, they would have to either arrive in Madrid or Barcelona, right? And then you still have a 3-hour drive or train from there. So, uh, I think it's definitely an advantage. I would also imagine, I'm just going to guess. I know there's probably a rivalry when Girona plays Zaragoza in the domestic league.
Yep.
I am going to guess that Venice Girona game, those fans that we already know that game tickets are sold out for the day, more or
Yep.
less. I mean, they've sold like 9,000 day tickets. They're sticking around and they're going to be cheering for Girona, in my opinion.
That was one of my
Those
questions.
Spanish. Oh, it was?
Are they
Okay.
cheering for the Spanish team, or are they
Yeah.
going to be cheering against their
I think
domestic opponent?
yes. As long as they're not playing Zaragoza, those Zaragoza fans are going to be cheering for Girona. And, that's going to turn into an advantage. But so, you talked about flights and all of this travel. Yeah, it's going to be easier. I also think Girona are going to have a good little fan base that are going to be able to make it there for
Yeah,
the
I think so.
quarterfinal game.
Yeah.
So, where they're going to have more fans automatically there than Venice just because there is no flight involved. So, yeah, I think, I do think it's a big advantage that Girona only needs to travel, 400 kilometers compared to jumping on a flight, getting through
Heading
border
over the Med.
control, and there you go. So I think
absolutely.
they have a slight advantage on Venice.
Also, with that, obviously, Girona will be very, very comfortable with that arena. They'll have played there so many times that they don't even know where the locker room is. They'll head straight to the locker room, all of that kind of stuff. Does that kind of fast forward or accelerate the kind of preparation that you're comfortable in your surroundings? Is that something the players are bothered about, or are they used to just being dumped in a nondescript box and having to find their way through a maze of corridors to get to the court and all of that stuff? Or will that familiarity help them?
Yes and no. I mean, we talked about how young Girona actually is, but at the same time, they're young, but they've still played a lot of basketball. And they're kind of used to being in situations where you're a little uncomfortable because there's a lot of things you cannot control as an athlete and a basketball player. And, that's what's your locker room like? What are you going to eat for pregame? How's the hotel bed? And, I remember, I think one of my young national team coaches was always like, just control the things that you can control, and all those other things that you can't control, don't let them bug you. And those are, you have to, I know it's easier said than done, but do you have a little bit of advantage because you've played in Zaragoza before? Maybe you've already stayed in the same hotel. Yeah, but at the end of the day, athletes are so used to this, look at all the foreigners coming and playing in different countries that they've never lived in before. And there's advantages and disadvantages. You're just so used to this.
Yeah. It's part of the job, right? It's just
it's part of the job. And
rock up, new hotel, find where the gym is or
Exactly.
whatever it is, and yeah.
So is it a bigger advantage because Girona's played in there before? Nah, not really. I think the biggest advantage is, all those Zaragoza fans are going to be behind Girona, I imagine.
Yeah, that will certainly help. And I do hope that's the case. We saw it last year when Zaragoza weren't there, that they still came in and provided a huge atmosphere. There were still thousands of local fans watching the Final Six, even though their team wasn't there. So, like you say, it's going to be, turbocharged this year for sure. The extra question I was going to throw you, because I kind of felt guilty not asking this question, is Koulibaly. I didn't see this season coming, and that's on my head. 17 points, 7.5 rebounds a game, and it's her first season in EuroLeague Women's. would she have even expected that? I don't even know what my question is. I think it's just a stunned.
Yeah.
And it's right that she's in the MVP conversation. She's in all the big conversations. She has absolutely been one of the most dominant bigs this year.
Most dominant bigs this year. And it's not, I mean, the number of times I've watched her, I'm like, oh, I think she's kind of limited. She's not at all. She shoots
No.
from three. She'll take you off the dribble. She's aggressive. You're like, wow, what do you do to try and slow her down? She also had an injury midway through the season. And, I think I read, well, clearly my translation wasn't that good, but I was like, oh, it's a broken bone. Takes a month off. And you're like, oh, it's going to take her a while to get back. Not at all. She was back in the same form that she was playing with before the injury. So I agree with you. I mean, I remember after the first couple Girona games this year, going and being like, Googling, who is Koulibaly?
Yeah,
because
I was trying to dig in and go, where has this all come from? Because
Yes.
it was an absolute
and she's older.
sleeper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
not
she's
that she
not a
hasn't played at a high
19-year-old.
level.
No.
It's not that she's not played at a high level, but again, and this is part of the reason for this podcast, trying to shine a light a little bit more deeper into European women's basketball. We should know who she is. We should be absolutely excited as much as we are for Holm and Yotsita. But yeah, she has had a hell of a season. I think, like you kind of see her, and because of the body frame and that initial style, you make a judgment call. And we're all guilty of it, we're absolutely. And then you watch her play and you're like, oh, okay, this isn't what I was expecting at all. There's mobility and agility, and she's reading the game. She's passing out of the post. It's not a black hole when you push the ball into it. It's not there and staying there. She'll quite happily kick it back out, and she'll wait for the double team. She's reading the game so well. And I just feel, looking at this Girona, obviously the first question I put about the backcourt, but for me now, if I'm any of the other teams and looking at Girona, my biggest concern is, how do I limit Koulibaly, or how do I slow her down or stop her or get her in foul trouble or whatever it is? How do I make her a non-factor in the game? Because I think she is the one that could end up, well, she had a 30-point game against Carollo in game day 8, so she is the one that can absolutely dominate a game more than any of those other Girona players potentially.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think she's the one who can have big time numbers just because of how efficient she is offensively and able to shoot the 3-point shot. My worry is, okay, so if you put all your focus and you go ahead and you double her, like you said, she's not a black hole. She's going to kick it out. So what, you going to double off Bibby and leave her open from 3-point range? Because Chloe Bibby's had a great season in EuroLeague Women this year. It's her second year in Girona. And I just think coach has confidence in her, and you see a player like Bibby who, I mean, she'll come in and first touch is going to put up a 3. So you're really going to help off or double Koulibaly under, I don't know, or do you just let her score and try and shut down everyone else? But I agree with you. I think, this is an interesting team that has a lot of different weapons, and when they're playing well, which we have seen throughout this season, especially to begin the season, they're difficult to take away their strengths because they have them in such different ways and in different positions. So they're a team that you cannot take lightly.
Yeah, I find them really intriguing. I'm trying to get my head around them, because I can look at other teams and I get the tempo and style they're going to play, and you know who they are and what they're going to do. I'm not sure I've worked that out from Girona yet. I'm not sure I can pigeonhole them into they're this type of team, or they're a bit like that. It's kind of like they're picking bits from all over the menu. They're not picking from one part of the menu. They're like, I'm going to grab a bit of that, and we're going to do this for this quarter, and then we'll change. And that's really hard to go against. However, that also makes that inconsistency that we talked about, the roller coaster. And to close out our episode today, and same question as I've had before, and I'm not going to allow you to have the same answer, okay, as you had in the previous 2 episodes. Girona, are we seeing them on Sunday lifting that trophy? Are we seeing them getting past Rare in the quarterfinals? Where do you see them finishing up here?
I think they have the talent to get past Rare Venice. I can't see them winning the semifinal, to be honest. I think that is their limit. I think they do sometimes rely heavily on Bibi, Koulibaly, and Yoisite.
Yeah.
And if one of those women do have an off night, it becomes very difficult, in my opinion, for Girona. So, I mean, they have one of the most experienced coaches who has won EuroLeague titles before. So, if anyone knows, it's going to be him. But I do think maybe Girona are a little bit more limited um, than the other couple teams that we've talked about already.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in the same place as you.
Okay.
I think they should go past Umana Raya. I think Umana Raya, and again, we're going to talk about that in our next episode. Raya is the topic of our next episode. But I think for me, Raya are probably the dark horse in this final six. I think they're the ones that I'm probably least confident about. So I think Girona will progress through that quarter final. And then what it comes down to for me with Girona is, if they can get those key pieces firing and have an inside and outside threat in the game, they can put 80, 90 points on the board pretty easily, relatively speaking. And then it becomes, whoever they face in the semi-final, it becomes, no matter what team it is, you have to keep up with them. Do you know what I mean? That's what it comes down to. Do you have the firepower to keep up with them? And there are only a few teams, and don't get me wrong, Galatasaray and Fenerbahce are two teams that can do that. But are we going to have a semi-final where it is literally just a lights out, run and gun, points on the board, defense being a swear word and a forgotten concept, a semi-final? Because it feels like it might be that way if we see Girona progress. But yeah, I see similar. I see them getting the semi-finals. I think that might be a step too far. But who knows? They could come away with that third place finish and finish the season with a medal around their necks, which... where we were looking at them at the beginning of the season, I don't know what you think, but that's a pretty impressive result for this Girona roster.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we're on the same page about them and the level that they're at. I do think if they, like you said, can come away with a third place finish, you have to feel very happy about the way that your season went and the success that you had. And yeah, I think it would be a great way to finish the season and then go into, the domestic playoffs, feeling confident the rest of the way. But it's going to be a tall order. I mean, I think their best players are going to have to play some of their best basketball.
Yeah. Yeah, this is one where it's not necessarily about the depth, it's about the stars now to step up and carry the majority of the game. Well, it's going to be another interesting one. That wraps us up for today. Thank you very much again, Shona. Another interesting dive into women's basketball. And it's just made me even more excited for EuroLeague Women's Final Six. I'm sorry you're not going to be there. I'm not that sorry. I'm not that upset, but I am sorry you're not going to miss out on it. I'm super excited for it. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Hoops and Headsets wherever you get your podcast. Jump onto social media and give us a follow as well. Hope you've enjoyed our first few episodes. We'll be back very soon with episode 4, where we'll have a closer look at Umana Raya and how they are going to fare in this year's EuroLeague Women's Final Six. Thanks very much. We'll see you all soon.